Good evening, and welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. If you enjoy chilling stories to listen to before sleep, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment. Your support helps keep these dark stories alive. Now listen closely. If someone knocks on your door after midnight, and the children outside refuse to look up, do not open it. No matter how politely they ask. No matter how cold it is. Because once you see their eyes, it is already too late. It was late autumn, in the year 2013, when this happened in the quiet outskirts of Ellicott City, Maryland. The kind of town where porch lights glow softly through the trees, and neighbors wave but rarely speak. The air that night was damp and heavy, carrying the smell of wet leaves and distant rain. The clock on the microwave read 12:47 a.m. My name is Nathaniel Crow, and I had just finished a double shift at a distribution warehouse off Route 40. I remember feeling bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that settles behind the eyes and makes the world feel slightly unreal. I kicked off my boots near the door, poured a glass of water, and stood in the kitchen listening to the hum of the refrigerator. That was when I heard the knock. It was slow. 3 taps. Careful. Almost polite. At first, I thought I imagined it. No one ever came by that late. My closest neighbor was half a mile down the road, and the street itself had no sidewalks. Another knock followed, slightly louder this time, followed by the faint sound of a child's voice. "Mister, can you help us?" Something about the tone made my stomach tighten. It wasn't scared, and it wasn't tired. It sounded rehearsed, like a line memorized too well. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. 2 children stood on my porch. A boy and a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. They wore thin hooded sweatshirts, both gray, both damp around the edges as if they had been standing in the mist for a long time. Their heads were tilted downward. I couldn't see their faces. "You shouldn't be out here this late," I said through the door. "Where are your parents?" There was a pause. Too long. The girl spoke next. Her voice was flat, almost hollow. "Our mother is sick. We need to come inside and use your phone." I remember glancing at my own phone on the counter behind me. Fully charged. Perfect signal. The situation made no sense. Every instinct I had told me to call the police, or at least keep the door closed. Still, there was something about children standing alone in the cold that pressed against my better judgment. I asked their names. The boy answered first. Aldrich. The girl followed. Marrow. Names I had never heard before, not once in my life. I noticed then that neither of them was shivering. Their clothes were too thin for the weather, yet they stood perfectly still. No fidgeting. No shifting weight. Just waiting. "Please," the boy said softly. "Let us in." I reached for the porch light switch. As the light flicked on, the girl slowly lifted her head. That is when I saw her eyes. They were completely black. Not dark brown. Not shadowed. Black, like polished stone, reflecting nothing. My breath caught in my throat. My heart began to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. The boy raised his head next, and his eyes were the same. Empty. Endless. Wrong. I stepped back from the door without realizing it. "We can't come in unless you invite us," Marrow said. Her mouth smiled, but nothing else on her face moved. "Please hurry." A sudden pressure filled the air, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. My ears rang. The porch light flickered once, twice. I shook my head and whispered, "I'm calling the police." The boy's smile vanished instantly. When he spoke again, his voice was deeper. Older. Angry. "That won't help you." The knocking began again, louder now. Not polite anymore. Urgent. Demanding. Each knock vibrated through the door and into my chest. "Let us in. Let us in. Let us in." I backed away until my shoulders hit the hallway wall. The temperature in the house dropped so fast I could see my breath. The lights dimmed. Somewhere behind me, the television turned on by itself, blasting white noise at full volume. Then, silence. The knocking stopped. The noise cut out. The air warmed slightly, as if nothing had happened at all. I stood there for several minutes before forcing myself to look again. The porch was empty. No footprints. No wet leaves disturbed. Nothing. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been exhaustion. Stress. My mind playing tricks on me. That belief lasted until I checked my front door. 3 small handprints were burned into the wood. Charred. Perfectly black. I moved out 2 weeks later. Before I left, I spoke with an older man at a gas station nearby. When I described the children, his face went pale. He told me his grandmother used to warn him about them. Black-eyed children, he called them. Doorstep things. Pretenders. He said they had been seen across the country for decades, always asking to be let in, always polite, always dangerous. I asked him what happens if you open the door. He looked away and said, nobody who'd ever stayed the same long enough to tell it. I still hear knocking sometimes, late at night, wherever I live. Slow. Careful. Patient. And I never answer the door after midnight. Because some doors, once opened, never truly close again. The first time it happened after I moved, I told myself it was coincidence. I relocated to a small rental house outside Bloomington, Indiana, early winter, when the sky stayed gray for weeks and the trees looked like black veins against the clouds. The house sat at the edge of a cornfield that had long since been harvested, leaving behind miles of dead stalks that whispered when the wind passed through them. It was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. I worked remotely by then, night shifts again, answering emails while the rest of the town slept. I tried to keep my lights on late, music playing softly, anything to convince myself I wasn't alone. For a while, it worked. Then, one night, at exactly 1:13 a.m., the power flickered. Not off. Just a brief dip, like the house exhaled. That was when I heard the knock. 3 taps. Careful. Patient. My chest tightened so fast it felt like my ribs might crack. I stayed frozen at my desk, staring at the darkened hallway that led to the front door. The knock came again, followed by a familiar voice that made my blood run cold. "Mister, we're cold." It was Marrow. I knew it before my mind could catch up. The same flat tone. The same false politeness stretched thin over something ancient and furious. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I shut my eyes like a child hiding from a nightmare. The voice changed. "Nathaniel," Aldrich said, speaking my name slowly, tasting it. "You promised you would help next time." I never spoke that promise aloud. I never even thought it. Yet they knew. The knocking grew louder. The walls vibrated softly. The wind outside died, leaving an unnatural stillness that pressed against my ears. Somewhere in the house, floorboards creaked as if something shifted its weight. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. The line connected, but there was no operator. Just breathing. Slow. Close. I ended the call and slid down against the wall, my back damp with sweat despite the cold. The knock stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence so complete it rang. When dawn finally came, pale and weak, I opened the door. There were no footprints. No marks. Nothing. Except a small object placed carefully on the welcome mat. A dead bird. Its eyes were gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that week. I started researching. Forums. Archived posts. Old message boards from the early days of the internet, buried beneath years of forgotten warnings. People from Texas, Vermont, California, Ohio. All describing the same thing. Children with black eyes. Late-night knocks. Requests for permission. An overwhelming sense of dread. One post stood out, written by someone named Eamon Pike, dated 2004. He claimed the children weren't demons or aliens, but something older. Something that learned to wear our shape. He wrote that they followed people who noticed them. Who survived them. Once seen, he wrote, "You are marked." I tried to contact him. The account was inactive. The email bounced back. Weeks passed. Then months. I began to believe the encounters might fade with time, like scars that eventually stop aching. I was wrong. The third encounter happened on a highway rest stop in western Pennsylvania. It was raining hard, the kind that turns headlights into smeared halos. I had pulled over to get coffee, desperate to stay awake. The rest stop was nearly empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I saw them near the vending machines. Aldrich and Marrow stood perfectly still, their reflections faint in the glass. Their heads were tilted down, hood shadows hiding their faces. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Don't look," I told myself. "Just walk away." As I passed them, Marrow spoke softly. "You keep running, Nathaniel. But every door is a door." I broke into a run, nearly slipping on the wet floor. When I glanced back, they were gone. The security footage later showed nothing. No children. No movement. Just me, panicking at nothing. That night, I dreamed of doors. Thousands of them. Some old and wooden, some metal, some glass. Every one of them knocking from the other side. I woke up screaming. The final encounter happened last summer, in the year 2024. I was visiting my sister in rural Oregon, trying to explain everything without sounding insane. She listened quietly, her face pale, fingers wrapped tight around her coffee mug. She didn't laugh. That scared me more than disbelief ever could. That night, we heard the knock together. She froze. I saw the fear in her eyes before I said a word. "Don't open it," I whispered. "No matter what you hear." The voice came through the door, calm and gentle. "Auntie, please. We just need to come inside." My sister began to cry silently. I held her hand, both of us shaking. The knocking continued for hours. Not hard. Not violent. Just patient. When morning came, the porch was empty. My sister moved the next day. I am writing this now because something has changed. The knocks no longer wait for night. Sometimes I hear them in crowded places. In grocery stores. In parking garages. On the walls of my own thoughts. Last night, as I sat on my bed, the sound came from inside the house. 3 taps. Careful. Right behind me. A voice whispered softly, closer than breath. "You're running out of doors. If this story reaches you, listen to me. If children knock on your door late at night and refuse to look up, do not answer. Do not speak. Do not invite them in. And if you ever hear knocking where no door exists, pray that it stops. Because once they stop knocking, it means they no longer need permission." After that night, I stopped pretending there was anywhere left to hide. The knocking followed me into waking life the way a migraine follows light, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. It didn't always come as sound anymore. Sometimes it was a pressure in my ears, a rhythmic pulse behind my eyes. 3 beats. Always 3. Careful. Patient. As if something was standing just beyond the edge of reality, tapping gently on the inside of my skull. I tried therapy. I tried medication. I tried telling myself that trauma rewires the brain, that fear can invent patterns where none exist. The therapist nodded, took notes, spoke softly about stress responses and recurring nightmares. She suggested grounding techniques. Breathing exercises. She asked if I felt watched. I didn't answer that question. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure where the watching ended and the waiting began. One evening in early October, the sky bruised purple with coming rain, I noticed something new. My reflection in the bathroom mirror didn't quite line up with me. When I tilted my head, it lagged a fraction of a second behind. When I blinked, my reflection blinked slower. I leaned closer to the glass and whispered my own name, just to hear a human voice say it. Nathaniel. Behind my reflection, for the briefest moment, I saw 2 smaller shapes standing in the hallway. Heads down. Hands folded neatly in front of them. I shattered the mirror with my fist. The glass cut deep. Blood soaked into the carpet. And still, through the ringing in my ears, I heard the knocking. Not from the door. From inside the walls. I started sleeping with every light on. I taped over my peepholes. I wedged chairs under door handles like a child afraid of burglars. It didn't matter. Doors stopped being physical things. Elevators became doors. Windows. Phone screens. Even dreams. Especially dreams. In one, I stood in a hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic and rot. Every door was closed except one at the end of the hall. Soft knocking echoed from behind it. When I opened it, I saw myself sitting on a bed, older, thinner, eyes hollowed by fear. He looked up at me and smiled with a mouth that wasn't his own. "You finally opened one," he said. I woke up choking. The internet went dark for me after that. Posts I tried to reread vanished. Forums deleted themselves. Old warnings returned error messages or blank pages. It was as if the record of them was being erased, piece by piece, the way a tide pulls writing from sand. Except for one message that appeared in my inbox without a sender. They learn faster when you're tired. They grow closer when you're afraid. They finish when you invite them without words. The message ended with a location. A town I had never heard of in northern Nevada, miles from anything resembling a city. A place that didn't even appear on most maps. I didn't want to go. But the knocking changed that night. It came from my chest. 3 slow thumps beneath my ribs, synchronized with my heartbeat. I pressed my hand there and felt it answer back, as if something inside me was tapping outward, testing the walls. That was when I understood. This wasn't about doors anymore. It was about thresholds. And I was becoming one. I packed what little I owned and drove west. The town was called Dry Wells. Just a name nailed to a weather-beaten sign, letters peeling like dead skin. There were no gas stations, no stores. Just a handful of houses scattered across red dirt and sagebrush, all facing inward toward a dry basin in the center of town. Everyone there looked tired. Not sleepy. Worn. Their eyes darted at sounds that weren't there. Their hands lingered near door handles even when they stood outside. When I asked a woman at a diner what brought her to Dry Wells, she stared at her coffee for a long time before answering. "They knock quieter here," she said. That night, I stayed in a small motel at the edge of town. The walls were thin. The air smelled like dust and old metal. I lay on the bed fully clothed, listening. At exactly 12:47 a.m., the knocking began. But it wasn't just mine. It echoed from every room. Every wall. A chorus of careful taps, overlapping but never out of rhythm. 3 beats. A pause. 3 more. Voices followed. Hundreds of them. Children. All asking politely. All asking to be let in. I ran outside. The basin at the center of town glowed faintly, like moonlight trapped beneath the ground. Figures stood around its edge. Men. Women. Elderly. All staring downward. All whispering. I pushed through the crowd until I saw what they were watching. The basin was not empty. It was a door. Not wood. Not metal. Something darker. A shape cut into the earth itself, edges too smooth, too deliberate. Blackness pooled inside it, deeper than shadow. 2 familiar shapes stood at its threshold. Aldrich and Marrow lifted their heads together. For the first time, they looked almost human. "You brought yourself to us," Marrow said gently. "We didn't even have to knock." The people around me began to step forward. One by one. Some crying. Some smiling. All moving willingly, as if answering a call they had waited their whole lives to hear. I understood then what happened to those who opened the door. They didn't disappear. They were used. They became the knocking. I felt the pressure in my chest build, each heartbeat a demand. The basin pulsed in time with it. I could feel something inside me stretching, thinning, preparing to open. So I did the only thing I had left. I refused. I screamed no into the night. Not softly. Not politely. I screamed until my throat tore and my vision blurred. I screamed rejection. I screamed defiance. I screamed until the rhythm broke. The knocking faltered. The basin cracked. A sound like glass under immense pressure split the air. The ground shuddered. People fell back, clutching their heads. Aldrich and Marrow recoiled, their mouths opening too wide, their black eyes bleeding light. The door screamed. And then it collapsed inward, folding in on itself like a wound forced shut. When I woke up, I was alone in the desert at dawn. Dry Wells was gone. No sign. No road. No basin. Just empty land stretching in every direction. The knocking is quieter now. But it hasn't stopped. Sometimes, when you lie awake at night and feel your heart beat just a little too loud, listen closely. If it ever taps back, careful and patient, you'll know the truth. Some doors are not in your house. Some doors are you. After the desert, time stopped behaving like something I could trust. Days stretched thin, then folded in on themselves. I woke up unsure whether I had slept at all, unsure whether the sun rising meant morning or just another illusion granted to me out of habit. I walked until my legs trembled, until my mouth tasted like dust and copper. Eventually, a highway appeared, then headlights, then a ride from a man who asked no questions and kept glancing at me in his rearview mirror as if he expected me to vanish. I told no one what happened in Dry Wells. I couldn't. The words slid apart before they reached my tongue. Every time I tried, my chest tightened, and that familiar pressure answered back, 3 slow pulses beneath my ribs. I returned east, drifting through towns without names that mattered, staying nowhere long enough to unpack. Motels felt safer than houses. No roots. No doors that belonged to me. But the world had changed its rules. The knocking no longer came from specific places. It came from moments. From silence between sentences. From the pause before sleep claimed me. Sometimes it came disguised as coincidence. A stranger tapping a cigarette against a table 3 times. A branch brushing a window in a steady rhythm. A child drumming fingers on a school bus seat, head lowered, hood shadowing their face. I stopped looking at children altogether. One afternoon, in a grocery store outside Columbus, Ohio, a little boy bumped into me near the cereal aisle. He mumbled an apology without looking up. As he passed, I caught a glimpse of his eyes in the reflection of a freezer door. Black. Perfect. Knowing. My vision blurred. I dropped my basket and ran. That night, the dream returned, stronger than before. I stood in a familiar hallway, but this time the walls were made of skin, warm and faintly pulsing. Doors lined both sides, breathing softly. The knocking came from all of them at once. When I placed my hand against one, it opened on its own. Inside was a room filled with people standing motionless, faces blank, eyes blackened. Their mouths opened together. "Let us through." I woke up screaming, my voice raw, my sheets soaked with sweat. That was when I realized something else had changed. The knocking wasn't just following me. It was learning from me. It began using my memories. My regrets. My guilt. Voices I trusted. Faces I loved. One night, I heard my mother's voice outside my motel door. She sounded exactly as she had before she died. Soft. Tired. Afraid. "Nathaniel, please. I just want to see you." My hand hovered inches from the handle before I collapsed to the floor, sobbing, biting my wrist until I tasted blood just to anchor myself in pain. The next morning, the motel manager found 3 wet footprints leading up to my door. Small ones. I started writing everything down. Every sound. Every pattern. Every lie they told. I filled notebooks with shaking hands, afraid that if I didn't anchor the experiences to ink, they would rewrite themselves inside me. Patterns emerged. They could not force entry. They could not lie outright, only bend truth. They weakened when confronted loudly, directly, without fear. And most importantly, they needed acknowledgement. Not permission. Recognition. To be seen was to invite them closer. That was why they hid their eyes. That was why the world had so many distractions. I avoided mirrors. I avoided reflections. I avoided silence. But avoidance is not survival. The final change came quietly. I woke one morning and realized the knocking had stopped. No pressure. No rhythm. Nothing. Relief should have followed. It didn't. The air felt wrong. Too still. Too empty. Like the moment after a scream when the echo hasn't arrived yet. I went outside and noticed people staring at me. Strangers. Their gazes lingered too long, their expressions uneasy, like they sensed something off but couldn't place it. A woman crossing the street pulled her child closer when she saw me. A man at a cafe changed tables. I caught my reflection in a darkened window. My eyes looked normal. Too normal. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not a knock. Not a pulse. A door opening. Memories surfaced that weren't mine. Images of thresholds crossed. Of warmth replaced by hunger. Of patience measured in decades. I felt understanding bloom where fear once lived. I understood why they knocked. I understood why they waited. I understood why permission mattered. Because crossing willingly was cleaner. Kinder. I screamed again, forcing the knowledge down, clinging to what was left of myself. I repeated my name aloud until it hurt. I listed facts. Places. Dates. Anything solid. But something had already taken root. The next day, a child stood outside my door. Just one. He didn't knock. He stood there, head bowed, hands folded. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Minutes passed. Hours. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were not black. They were afraid. "Please," he whispered. "They won't stop following me. They said you could help." Behind him, reflected faintly in the glass of the hallway window, I saw dozens of small shapes waiting patiently, heads lowered. I felt the door inside me respond. For the first time, the knocking came from both sides. This is where the story ends for you. Because what I chose next does not belong to words anymore. If you are listening to this late at night, and you feel the urge to check your door, don't. If you hear a knock that feels like it knows you, don't answer. And if you ever meet someone who seems a little too patient, a little too quiet, and whose presence makes your heart tap back in careful rhythm, walk away. Some of us did not survive. Some of us became the threshold. And we are very, very good at waiting. I stayed on the floor for a long time after the child spoke, long enough for my legs to go numb and my thoughts to slow into something thick and sticky. The hallway light flickered, not from faulty wiring, but from something passing in front of it again and again. Slow movement. Careful movement. The kind that did not need to rush. The boy outside my door did not knock. He only waited. I asked his name, my voice barely louder than a breath. "Tyran," he said. His eyes never left the carpet. "They said you would understand." I did understand. That terrified me more than anything else. I told him to stay where he was and pressed my forehead against the door. The wood felt warm. Too warm. Like skin after fever. I could feel the door inside me responding in kind, a pressure that was no longer painful, just present. Familiar. I whispered rules to myself, like prayers learned too late. Do not invite. Do not name. Do not acknowledge more than necessary. "What do they want from you?" I asked. Tyran swallowed. His reflection trembled in the glass. "They want me to open." A sound drifted through the hallway then, a sound like many hands brushing fabric at once. The shapes in the reflection shifted. Heads tilted. Something smiled without a mouth. I told Tyran to close his eyes. He did. That mattered. I opened my door just enough to pull him inside. The air screamed. Not aloud. Inside my bones. Inside my teeth. The moment he crossed the threshold, the pressure in my chest surged so hard I dropped to my knees. The hallway lights shattered one by one, plunging us into darkness lit only by the glow seeping from beneath the door at the end of the hall. A door that had never been there before. The knocking began again. Everywhere. In the walls. In the ceiling. In my ribs. They were angry. "You cheated," Aldrich's voice hissed from nowhere and everywhere. "You stole from the door." Tyran clutched my sleeve, shaking so hard his teeth chattered. I wrapped my arms around him and felt something recoil at the contact, like a hand jerking back from fire. I understood then. They could follow. They could pressure. They could wait. But they could not take. Only we could give. I dragged Tyran into the bathroom and shut the door. The mirror above the sink rippled like disturbed water. Shapes pressed against it from the other side, faces forming and unforming, eyes black as open wells. I covered the mirror with a towel and sat with my back against the tub, breathing through the pounding in my chest. "Listen to me," I told Tyran. "No matter what you hear, no matter who they sound like, you don't answer. You don't look. You don't open anything." He nodded. Tears slid silently down his cheeks. The knocking went on for hours. Voices changed. They used laughter. They used pleading. They used fury. They sounded like teachers, parents, friends. At one point, they used my own voice, begging myself to let them in, promising relief, promising rest. I screamed until my throat bled, not at them, but at myself. I screamed my name, my age, the smell of rain in Maryland, the feel of broken glass in my hand. I screamed humanity into the space until it had no room left to breathe. Just before dawn, the knocking faded. Not stopped. Withdrawn. The light under the impossible door dimmed, then vanished. The hallway settled into something almost normal. Tyran slept curled against my side, exhaustion finally pulling him under. I stayed awake, listening to my own heartbeat, waiting for it to answer itself. It didn't. That was how I knew I had bought us time. We left the city before noon. I didn't pack. I didn't look back. I took Tyran to places with noise and crowds and no doors that belonged to anyone. Bus stations. Laundromats. Diners that never closed. Places where thresholds blurred into movement. Along the way, he told me things in pieces. They came to him first through dreams. Through small coincidences. A knock that echoed when no one else heard it. A teacher who smiled too long. A friend who stared without blinking. They told him he was special. That he listened better than others. That he felt doors where others felt walls. They were not wrong. By the third night, I noticed people watching us again. Too many. Too attentive. Children in places children should not be. Heads down. Hands folded. Waiting. I realized then what saving Tyran had done. It had made me visible. Not just to them. To others like me. We weren't rare. We were just quiet. Survivors scattered across states and years, each carrying the echo of a knock that never fully faded. Some hid. Some ran. some broke. And some learned to hold the door shut from the inside. I found them the way you find others who are afraid of the same thing you are. Through patterns. Through absence. Through the way a room changes when certain people enter it. A woman in Michigan who never sat with her back to a door. A man in Georgia who slept in his car despite owning a house. A bartender in New Mexico who flinched whenever a customer tapped the counter 3 times. They didn't need explanations. They already knew. We began to move together, loosely, never staying long, never forming anything that could be traced or named. We watched. We warned. We intervened when we could. Sometimes we were too late. Not everyone wanted to be saved. Some opened willingly. Those were the worst. They smiled with too much relief. Their fear melted into devotion. They spoke of warmth. Of belonging. Of finally being useful. They became doors we could not close. Years have passed now. I don't count them anymore. Time feels thinner where I exist, stretched between moments of knocking and moments of quiet. Tyran is older. Stronger. He knows the rules. He knows the cost. He has learned how to listen without answering, how to feel pressure without yielding. Sometimes, late at night, he asks me what will happen to us in the end. I don't lie. I tell him that one day, I may not be able to hold the door shut anymore. That one day, the knocking inside me may grow louder than my name. When that happens, I tell him, he must leave. He must not look back. He must not knock. If you are hearing this now, understand why I am telling you. This is not a story. It is a warning moving from mouth to ear, from heart to heart, looking for somewhere safe to rest. If you ever feel a knock that comes from inside your chest, answer it with noise. With defiance. With everything that makes you human. And if one night, a tired man with careful eyes and a child who refuses to look up pass you by without speaking, let us go. We are not running. We are holding the line. And as long as someone does, the doors will remember what it means to stay closed. There are nights now when the world feels thin enough to tear with a fingernail. Those nights always begin quietly. Too quietly. No wind. No insects. No distant engines humming on forgotten highways. Silence settles like dust, coating everything, making even breathing feel loud. On those nights, Tyran and I do not speak. We sit back to back, wherever we happen to be, and listen for the smallest change in the air. Because the knocking has evolved again. It no longer announces itself with sound. It arrives as anticipation. A certainty that something is about to ask. The first time I noticed it, we were sheltering in an abandoned drive-in theater outside Amarillo. The screen loomed above us, cracked and peeling, a white rectangle waiting to display something it should never show. Tyran stiffened suddenly, his shoulders rising. "Do you feel that?" he whispered. I nodded. The space between heartbeats stretched. The pressure returned, not sharp, not urgent, but deliberate. A reminder. I closed my eyes and felt the door inside me tremble, testing its hinges. From the darkness beyond the rows of rusted speaker poles, a shape moved. Then another. Then dozens more, emerging without sound, their outlines barely visible against the night sky. They didn't walk toward us. They waited. Children stood at the edge of the lot, heads bowed, hands folded. Behind them, taller shapes hovered, unfinished, like sketches erased and redrawn too many times. Aldrich and Marrow stood among them, unchanged by years, unchanged by distance. "You are tired, Nathaniel," Marrow said, her voice carried directly into my thoughts. "You have been holding the door alone for too long." Others stepped forward from the darkness. Faces I recognized. People we had tried to save. People we had failed. Their eyes were black now, but their mouths wore expressions of gratitude. "We don't knock anymore," Aldrich said gently. "We wait for you to invite yourself." Tyran grabbed my hand. His pulse was racing, too fast, dangerously close to sinking with the pressure building in my chest. I did the only thing that still worked. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was human. Because it was wrong and loud and full of cracks. I laughed until my lungs burned and my vision blurred, until the rhythm shattered. The waiting figures recoiled as if struck. The anticipation fractured. The silence broke. Wind tore across the lot, rattling metal and ripping sound from the earth. The figures dissolved backward into shadow, retreating without a word. We didn't stop running until dawn. After that night, the rules became clearer. Fear fed them. Silence welcomed them. Stillness gave them shape. Noise disrupted them. Disorder confused them. Humanity wounded them. So we learned to be messy. We argued loudly in public places. We played music too loud in borrowed cars. We told jokes that didn't land. We cried without shame. We refused to be quiet, refused to be neat, refused to be patient. The door inside me hated it. Sometimes it pushed back hard enough to make me collapse, gasping, fingers digging into concrete or dirt as if I could anchor myself to the world through pain. Tyran stayed with me every time, grounding me with his voice, reminding me who I was when the knocking tried to rewrite me. Still, I could feel myself thinning. The door wasn't just inside me anymore. It was learning my shape, my voice, my memories. I would catch myself thinking in patterns that weren't mine, measuring moments by readiness instead of meaning, by permission instead of choice. That was when I knew the truth I had been avoiding. Holding the door shut was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be passed on. I didn't tell Tyran at first. I watched him instead. Watched how he resisted. How he disrupted the rhythm naturally, instinctively. How the pressure recoiled from him more easily now than from me. He was becoming something else. Not a door. A lock. The realization terrified me. One evening, as we sheltered beneath a highway overpass in Oregon, rain pounding the concrete like 1,000 frantic knocks, I finally told him everything. About dry wells. About the basin. About what I felt growing inside me. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable in the dim light. When I finished, he said something I will never forget. Maybe they chose the wrong person first. That night, the knocking returned with a fury I had never felt before. Not patient. Not polite. Desperate. The pressure inside me surged, dragging me toward something vast and opening, something hungry for completion. I screamed Tyran's name as the world folded inward. And then it stopped. Not because they withdrew. Because Tyran stepped forward. He stood in front of me, shoulders squared, eyes blazing with something fierce and uninviting. "No," he said. Loud. Certain. Final. The sound shattered the rhythm like a hammer through glass. I felt the door inside me slam shut so hard it screamed. The shapes that had gathered recoiled violently, tearing backward into nothing, their voices collapsing into static and broken echoes. For the first time since Maryland, the knocking did not linger. It fled. I collapsed, sobbing, the pressure draining from my chest like poison pulled from a wound. Tyran held me until my breathing steadied, until the world stopped shaking. When I looked at him, I saw something new in his eyes. Not black. Bright. Defiant. The door inside me is still there. I feel it sometimes, stretching, remembering. But it no longer answers when they call. It listens to Tyran instead. We still move. We still watch. We still warn when we can. But now, when the knocking comes, it hesitates. Because somewhere out there, the things that wait have learned a new fear. They have learned that doors can refuse. They have learned that permission can be denied. And they have learned that some thresholds fight back. If this reaches you, if you feel the pressure building, if the silence grows too patient, remember this. You are not alone. Make noise. Break rhythm. Refuse stillness. And if you ever feel something waiting politely for you to open yourself, don't answer. Because somewhere, someone like us is listening. And we will do everything we can to keep the door shut. After that night under the overpass, the world began to behave again, or at least it pretended to. The knocking did not vanish, but it lost its confidence. It came softer, uncertain, like a habit that no longer knew its purpose. Sometimes it arrived and then stopped, as if something on the other side was reconsidering. Those moments were the most dangerous. Hesitation meant adaptation. Tyran grew quieter after that. Not withdrawn, not afraid, just focused. He listened to the world differently now, tilting his head as if catching echoes others missed. He could sense the pressure before it formed, the way animals sense earthquakes before the ground splits. When he spoke, the air seemed to settle around his words, as if reality itself leaned in to listen. We reached the coast in Northern California in early spring. The ocean helped. Waves do not keep rhythm. They crash and retreat in endless variation, loud and unpredictable. The door inside me hated the sound. It shrank back whenever we stood near the water, its pulse disrupted by the chaos of wind and surf. For a while, we stayed in a town whose name I will not write. Some places are safer when left unnamed. We rented a room above a closed bookstore and spent our days repairing broken things left behind by other tenants. Shelves, chairs, a cracked window that whistled when the wind hit it just right. At night, Tyrion and I talked about ordinary things. Movies we half remembered. Foods we missed. Roads we wanted to drive someday. Normality became an act of resistance. Laughter, too. Every shared joke felt like hammering another nail into the door. But doors remember. One evening, as fog rolled in from the sea and swallowed the streetlights whole, Tyrion stiffened beside me. "They are close," he said. I felt it too. Not the knocking. Something worse. Listening. The fog thickened unnaturally fast, crawling up the building like breath against glass. Street sounds vanished. Even the ocean fell silent. Then came the voices. Not outside. Not inside. Between. "We hear you now, Nathaniel," Aldrich said, his tone no longer polite. No longer patient. "You learn to be loud. You learn to refuse. But you are still open." Merrow's voice followed, softer, almost sad. "Every door opens eventually. Even broken ones." I pressed my palms to my chest, focusing on the heat of my own heartbeat. It was uneven. Human. Wrong in all the right ways. Tyrion stepped forward, placing himself between me and the fog-choked window. "He doesn't answer anymore," Tyrion said. "I do." The fog recoiled slightly, as if offended. "You are young," Merrow said. "You will learn patience." Tyrion shook his head. "No. You misunderstand. I'm not patient." The glass shattered outward. The fog poured into the room like a living thing, cold and smelling faintly of damp soil. Shapes moved within it, forming and unforming, testing the space. Faces appeared briefly, too many to count, all with lowered eyes. The pressure inside me surged, instinct screaming to open, to relieve, to let the moment pass by yielding. Tyrion shouted. Not words. Sound. He slammed a metal chair against the radiator, again and again, irregular, violent, deafening. I joined him, yelling nonsense, names, memories, anything that broke the shape of thought. The room filled with chaos, a storm of noise and motion and refusal. The fog screamed. It pulled back, shredding itself against the noise, retreating through the broken window in tatters. The pressure snapped like a severed wire, leaving behind a ringing emptiness. When it was over, we collapsed on the floor, shaking and breathless. That was when I noticed the mark on Tyrion's hand. 3 faint lines, etched into his skin like old scars. My heart sank. They hadn't left unmarked. Days passed. Then weeks. The lines did not fade. They darkened slightly, becoming more defined. Tyrion pretended not to notice, but I saw him rubbing his palm absently, the way I used to press my chest when the knocking began. I understood then what the waiting truly meant. They do not give up. They adapt. They move from door to door, from soul to soul, finding the weak points, the cracks, the moments of compassion that can be twisted into permission. And they had found Tyrion. I didn't tell him my fear. Fear feeds them. Instead, I taught him everything I knew. Every rule. Every trick. Every mistake I had made. We practiced disruption. Practiced refusal. Practiced being loudly, defiantly human. But knowledge does not erase destiny. The night it happened, the sky was clear, stars sharp and unforgiving. We were camped inland, far from towns, far from people. I woke to find Tyrion standing alone, staring into the dark. The pressure was gone. So was the noise. The world held its breath. They're not knocking, Tyrion said calmly. They're asking me to wait. I staggered to my feet, panic slicing through me. No. Don't listen. Waiting is how they get inside. He turned to me, eyes clear, steady, painfully kind. They can't take me, he said. But they can follow me forever. Or I can do something else. The realization hit me like a blow. You won't, I said. You can't. He smiled faintly. Someone has to stand where the door wants to be. Before I could reach him, the air split open. Not a door. A threshold. It formed around Tyrion, lightless and absolute, responding to something inside him that answered willingly but not submissively. The pressure rushed toward him, not demanding, but recognizing. He didn't open. He anchored. The world shook as if struck by a bell. The waiting thing screamed, a sound of frustration and loss and rage, as the threshold collapsed inward, sealing around Tyrion like armor rather than emptiness. When the light faded, he was gone. The silence that followed was not patient. It was wounded. I searched for days. Weeks. I never found a trace. No footprints. No marks. No echoes. But the knocking changed after that. It became distant. Muted. As if something essential had been removed from the equation. Now, when I feel it, it does not come from my chest. It comes from far away, like thunder beyond the horizon. I still move. I still warn. I still make noise. And sometimes, late at night, when the world grows too quiet, I hear something else. Not knocking. Holding. If you are listening to this, know that someone paid a price you did not see. Know that patience is not infinite. And know this above all. Doors are not inevitable. Some are sealed. Some are broken. And some are guarded by those who refuse to open, even when it cost them everything. After Tyrion vanished, the world did not celebrate its victory. It adjusted. Weeks passed in a strange half-light where days felt borrowed and nights felt monitored. I slept in fragments, never more than an hour at a time, my body refusing the vulnerability of surrender. When I closed my eyes, I did not dream. Something else filled the space where dreams should have been, a quiet awareness, like standing guard over an empty room and knowing you are not alone. The ocean no longer helped. Its chaos had dulled, as if something far beneath the waves had learned its patterns. Even the wind began to feel deliberate, gusts pausing too long between breaths, listening for response. I felt Tyrion sometimes. Not as a presence. Not as a voice. As resistance. Like leaning against a locked door and realizing someone on the other side is leaning back just as hard. That was how I knew he was still holding. The marks never appeared on me again. The pressure in my chest remained faint, manageable, like an old injury that aches before rain. I could still feel the door inside myself, but it no longer strained forward. It had found something else to push against. That should have been the end. It wasn't. The waiting things began to fracture. Without a clear threshold to gather around, they scattered. Smaller manifestations appeared in places that had never reported them before. Suburbs. Airports. Hospitals. Schools. Places where permission is assumed rather than asked for. Security footage began to surface online. Blurry clips of children standing motionless in hallways long after closing hours. Emergency calls from people reporting polite voices on baby monitors when no one was home. Teachers complaining of students who never blinked, never spoke unless spoken to, and vanished from attendance records without explanation. I recognized the signs immediately. They were no longer focused on me. They were adapting to a world that didn't know to refuse. I started writing again. Not warnings this time. Instructions. How to break rhythm. How to stay loud. How to deny without confrontation. I embedded them in stories, comments, mundane advice threads. Anywhere people would read without realizing they were being armed. Most would never need it. Some would. I learned quickly which ones. They were the ones who wrote back describing pressure instead of fear. Anticipation instead of dread. Relief at the idea of being asked. Those were the ones closest to opening. I answered every one of them. Then, one night, I received a message that stopped my hands cold. It came from an address that could not exist, a string of characters that folded in on itself when I tried to read it. The message was short. We feel the strain. The lock is not infinite. When it breaks, you will hear us again. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. That night, the knocking returned. Not near. Everywhere. Not sound, but alignment. A sudden synchronization in the world, like countless metronomes snapping into the same tempo. Traffic lights shifted together. Heartbeats around me seemed to fall into step. Even my breathing tried to follow a rhythm I had spent years unlearning. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. I dropped to my knees in the middle of an empty parking structure and screamed nonsense into the concrete until my throat burned. The rhythm faltered, but it did not fully break. Something was changing. Tyrion was weakening. I knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the clouds appear. The resistance I felt through the door inside me had softened. Not gone. Strained. Holding forever was never the plan. Endurance is not endless. I understood then what he had done. He hadn't sealed the threshold. He had slowed it. Bought time. Time for someone else. The realization hollowed me out. I didn't want there to be someone else. But doors do not care what we want. I began to feel watched again, not by children, not by polite faces at thresholds, but by something larger. Something patient enough to let the small things fail first. The waiting things were not leaders. They were tools. The true presence never knocked. It aligned. The first sign was the dreams returning. Not mine. Other people's. I would wake knowing what strangers had dreamed the night before. Corridors. Stillness. A sense of being needed. Of being chosen. Chosen was the most dangerous word of all. I tracked patterns across states, across time zones. Clusters of reports. Places where the air felt too balanced, too symmetrical. Where chaos had thinned. One place stood out. A town in the Midwest, new on the map, built fast, clean, efficient. Wide roads. Identical houses. No dead ends. No alleys. No unnecessary corners. No places to hide noise. I went there knowing I might not come back. The town felt wrong the moment I arrived. Not hostile. Inviting. Too inviting. People smiled easily, waved often, lingered in conversation just a second too long. Children played quietly, games orderly, rules followed without argument. At night, the town slept as one. No sirens. No barking dogs. No late music. Perfect silence. I rented a room and waited. The knocking didn't come. Instead, the alignment did. I felt my heartbeat pulled gently into time with something vast and calm. The door inside me stirred, not from pressure, but from recognition. This was where it would end. Not with a knock. With agreement. I fought it the only way I knew how. I disrupted. I smashed bottles in the street. I shouted incoherently. I blasted music from my phone at random intervals. People came out of their houses, confused, annoyed, frightened. Good. Fear was better than stillness. The air trembled. The alignment wavered. That was when I felt it. Tyranny. Not as resistance. As warning. A surge of urgency slammed into my chest, nearly knocking me over. Images flooded my mind. A fracture. A limit reached. A lock under strain. I understood. This town wasn't a door. It was a replacement. If the lock broke, this place would become the new threshold. I ran to the center of town, where a small park sat unnaturally pristine, grass trimmed too evenly, trees planted too symmetrically. I screamed until my voice tore, daring the stillness to answer me. It did. Not with children. With quiet. A quiet so deep it swallowed sound itself. And in that quiet, something vast leaned closer. "You have delayed us long enough," it said without voice. "The lock will fail. The door will open. Choose where." I laughed through tears. "No," I said. "You don't get to choose anymore." I slammed my fists into the ground, into the rhythm, into myself, pouring every scrap of humanity I had left into the disruption. Memories. Regret. Love. Noise. The alignment shattered. The town woke screaming. Lights flickered. Dogs barked. People cried out in confusion and fear. The symmetry broke, and with it, the invitation. The presence recoiled. I collapsed, empty. When I woke, the town was gone. Not destroyed. Never there. I was alone on a stretch of cracked highway, dawn bleeding slowly into the sky. The knocking is quieter now than it has ever been. But I know better. Silence does not mean defeat. It means preparation. If Tyrann is still holding, he is not alone anymore. I feel others now. Locks forming. Barriers imperfect but defiant. If you are reading this, if you feel that pull toward stillness, toward agreement, toward being chosen, listen carefully. Make noise. Break symmetry. Refuse the comfort of permission. Because the door is tired. And the lock is learning. And when the knocking returns, it will not be polite. It will ask the world itself to open. The end did not arrive with a sound. That was the most terrifying part. For months after the town vanished, the world remained loud enough to feel safe. Sirens returned. Arguments echoed through thin apartment walls. Children cried, laughed, screamed, lived. Chaos breathed again, and for a while, the knocking stayed buried so deep I almost believed it was over. Almost. The first sign was the pause. A hesitation in everything. Traffic stopped at green lights. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. Birds froze on power lines without flying away. Even my own breath caught in my chest, held by something that was not fear, but attention. The lock I felt, the scattered resistance, all of it tightened at once. Then came the understanding. Tyrion was no longer holding alone. He was failing. Not because he was weak. Because the pressure had finally learned how to be gentle. How to press without force. How to invite instead of demand. That night, I felt the door inside me respond again. Not violently. Not painfully. Willingly. I collapsed to the floor, clutching my chest, whispering my name like a dying prayer. But the sound came out wrong, stretched, echoed, as if the space around me had grown larger than my voice could fill. The knocking returned. Not 3 beats. All of them. Every rhythm at once. Every heartbeat, every ticking clock, every step taken anywhere in the world aligned into a single, unified question. May we come through? I realized then what the waiting things had been preparing for all along. Not a door in a house. Not a threshold in a town. Not a willing soul. Us. Humanity itself. Permission had always been collective. Hidden. Unspoken. Given every time we chose silence over noise, comfort over chaos, stillness over defiance. And we were giving it. I felt Tyrion one last time. Not as resistance. As apology. The lock shattered. The sound that followed was not loud. It was absence. A sudden, total removal of disorder. The world inhaled and never exhaled. I stood up slowly, my body moving without instruction. The pressure in my chest dissolved into clarity. Peace. Purpose. When I looked in the mirror, my eyes were still my own. That was how I knew it was over. Outside, I could hear polite voices rising everywhere at once, calm and patient, no longer knocking, no longer waiting. Asking. And everywhere, doors were opening. If this is the last thing you ever hear from me, understand this. We did not lose because we were weak. We lost because we wanted quiet. And now, there is nothing louder than the sound of a world finally letting something in.